All right. Okay, so I'm going to get us started here at 7:01. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Copperfield's Book's first ever online event with Rick Hansen. My name is Jamie Madsen, and I'm the Marketing and Events Coordinator with Copperfield's Books, and I will also be your host for the evening. As many of you know, and for those of you who may not, Copperfield's Books has been committed to literature, education, and creating community together since our founding in 1981. We're thrilled to be offering online events during these times to keep our community connected while we're forced to be separated. Thanks for joining us in our new online event adventure. A couple of house cleaning items before I introduce tonight's author. We will be utilizing the chat box to provide links to view upcoming Copperfield's events, links for purchasing Dr. Hansen's current book, as well as previous titles, as well as my contact details for follow-up information or questions after the event commences. Additionally, the chat box will be your go-to with any questions or comments for the author. The format for tonight's event will feature 30 to 45 minutes of speaking and will be followed by a live Q&A. We will try to get to as many of your questions as we can, as your feedback is always welcomed and appreciated. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our speaker for the evening, Dr. Rick Hansen. He is a psychologist, senior fellow of the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, and a New York Times bestselling author. His books are available in 28 languages and include Resilient, Hardwiring Happiness, Just One Thing, Buddha's Brain, and Mother Nurture. He edits the Wise Brain Bulletin and has numerous audio programs. His website also offers live stream meditations, which, full disclosure, have been a great resource for myself during these uncertain times.
Yeah.
The founder of the Wellspring Institute for Neuroscience and Contemplative Wisdom, he has been an invited speaker at NASA, Oxford, Stanford, Harvard, and other major universities, and has taught in meditation centers worldwide. His most recent release, Neurodharma, explores the new neuroscience of awakening and offers a bold yet plausible plan for reverse engineering peak experiences, sense of oneness, and even enlightenment itself. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rick.
Well, thank you, Jamie, and welcome everyone. I have a special place in my heart for Copperfield's. The last book I wrote is called Resilient, which seems very timely these days. And I co-authored it with our son, Forrest Hanson, with whom I also do the Being Well podcast. We've been offering that now for a couple of years. It's really full of interest, and we often have amazing guests coming to it. Anyway, so Forrest and I went up to Copperfield's in Petaluma, and we did a live book event there, and it was really great. So anyway, I'm very grateful. I feel that one of the most human things of all is a library or a bookstore. And they were major refuges for me when I was a kid. They're still refuges for me, libraries and bookstores, including online versions of them, but especially in person. There's something very particular about walking into, what's the phrase, a clean, well-lighted place, and really enjoying the company of books, as well as, like with Jamie, the company of the good people there. So I want to welcome you in this online kind of way. It's not virtual. We actually are together in our way. You're here in my imagination. I'm here with you in a flat screen, and yet you can get a sense of who I am. And I'm very happy that you have an interest in my latest book. What I'd like to do is to read a little bit from it with you, to you, and then say a few words really about how to use the material in it in this current time with the coronavirus plague sweeping around the world, certainly here in America where I live, including in California where I really live. After I talk about some very practical applications in the larger context of practice, doing those things we can inside our own minds in how we relate to our experiences and how we then help ourselves heal and grow along the way. after I kind of get through that, we will open it up definitely by 1/2 for questions, discussion, comments, and so forth, moderated by Jamie. And then we'll end at the top of the hour, which is 8 p.m. Pacific time. Also, Jamie will be forwarding to you a link you can click if you like that will take you to a page on my website where you can get a lot of really neat materials, some guided meditations. Jamie was just talking about how she's been doing some of them, and they've been useful for her, as well as other information related to this presentation. I think I'll offer a slide set for some things I've been doing. You could take a look at the PowerPoint slide set, and also we'll definitely give you those bonus materials. Okay, so the Neurodharma Express. If I could, I want to show you the cover. And if you've, this is not, anyway, I'm really happy about this. The cover kind of tells the tale. You can see the image of the mountain. It looks like neural circuitry at the bottom and then becomes progressively loftier along the way. And the subtitle really says what it's about. New science, ancient wisdom, and 7 practices of the highest happiness. I've been inspired by the great teachers around the world and their invitation to heal, self-actualize, and gradually progress in the process of awakening altogether. So what the book's about fundamentally is using modern brain science integrated with perennial wisdom in really practical, experiential, directly accessible ways to gradually cultivate 7 ways of being inside ourselves that we find really fulfilled in the great teachers and are our birthright. They are available to all of us. We have an intuition of all of them already, and arguably these 7 ways of being, which I'll describe in just a moment, are inherent in our deepest, truest nature, which we can gradually uncover and rest increasingly in. So that's kind of the framework here. And if I can, I'll read you from the opening pages, really. I'll just decide how much I want to say. Yeah, I'll read just a few pages. So here we go. First chapter, Mind in Life. By the way, the book is full of reference notes, which are buried in the fine print in the back. For those who, like me, like that sort of thing, including lots of citations. I think there are several hundred scientific references in the book, as well as a number of references to the early teachings of the Buddha, which is sort of my own grounding and contemplative practice. These are very psychological, very pragmatic. The book itself is not inherently religious. It can be completely approached within an entirely secular frame. And so anyway, that's kind of the background there. And as one of the very first footnotes in the book says, this term mind in life comes from the title of Evan Thompson's wonderful book about grounding mental activity in underlying biology and how to think about all that. He's a brilliant philosopher of the mind, I think now at the University of British Columbia. So with a nod and a grateful bow in his direction, I'll start here. The beginning quotation comes from the Dhammapada, which is an early Buddhist text. It says, if by giving up a lesser happiness, one could experience a greater happiness, a wise person would renounce the lesser to behold the greater. So the text begins. I've hiked a lot in the mountains, and sometimes a friend farther up the trail has turned and looked back and encouraged me onward. Such a friendly gesture. Come join me. Watch out for the slippery ice. You can do it. I've often thought about those moments while writing this book, which is about the heights of human potential, about being as wise and strong, happy and loving as any person can ever be. If those heights are like a great mountain, awakening is the magnificent journey that carries you along toward the top. Many real people have gone very far up. The great sages and teachers throughout history, as well as others no one has heard about. and I imagine them turning with a sweet smile and beckoning us to join them. Those who have climbed this mountain come from different cultures and have different personalities, but they all seem alike to me in 7 ways. They are mindful, they are kind, they live with contentment and emotional balance through even the hardest times. They are whole and authentic. They are present here and now. They speak of feeling connected with everything, and a light shines through them that does not seem entirely their own. You might have your own examples of inspiring people you've heard about, or whose words you've read or listened to, or perhaps even met. These individuals are models to us of what is possible. I've known some of them myself. They are down to earth, humorous, realistic, and supportive, not the cartoon-like stereotype of exotic characters in caves making cryptic pronouncements. They have no interest in celebrity. Some have taken a spiritual approach, while others have been secular. Their realization is genuine, and it's the result of the path they've traveled, not some unique transformation that's unattainable for the rest of us. Through their own example, they demonstrate that wonderful ways of being lie ahead, that accessible paths lead onward, and that much as their own efforts were fruitful, ours can be too. And remarkably, you can see some of their qualities already deep down inside yourself, even if they're sometimes covered over by stresses and distractions. These ways of being are not reserved for the chosen few. They are opportunities for all of us, and we'll be exploring how to develop them in these 7 practices of awakening, which is what my book is about: steadying the mind, warming the heart, resting in fullness, being wholeness, receiving nowness, opening into allness, and finding timelessness. There are many traditions which are like many routes up the mountain of awakening. Nonetheless, on each of these routes, we find the same steps taken again and again. Steps of steadiness, lovingness, fullness, wholeness, nowness, allness, and timelessness. This is some of the most profound and perhaps sacred territory there is. It is ultimately beyond science and logic, so words about it can be loose, metaphorical, and poetic. The complete development of these 7 ways of being marks the pinnacle of human possibility, which could be called enlightenment or full awakening. Meanwhile, even the first simple sense of them is very useful in everyday life. For instance, while dealing with stressful challenges, it's so good to rest in the fullness of feeling already peaceful, happy, and loved. And whether it is for the beginning of the path or its end, today we have an unprecedented opportunity to explore a kind of reverse engineering of awakening that is grounded in the living body. I think I'll pause right there and stop after the first page and a half and make a little comment that'll open us up into the questions and discussion phase of this evening. I don't think that the modern understanding of our biology and our neurology is necessary for healing, self-actualization, and awakening. On the other hand, and clearly many people have progressed very far in the path without that. On the other hand, I think that this growing understanding of how the mental processes of suffering and happiness are embedded in underlying physical, neurological processes, that growing understanding gives us all kinds of new opportunities to help ourselves and to help other people too, as I said, to heal, to self-actualize, and even progress in our own ways toward what we consider to be enlightenment. And I think that we can know ourselves in 2 ways. We can know ourselves from the outside in, objectively, in terms of our hardware, through the lens of science. We can also know ourselves subjectively, from the inside out, experientially through the lens of psychology and contemplative wisdom. And where these two ways of knowing ourselves meet is what I call neurodharma. Neuro is a nod to knowing ourselves scientifically and objectively. Dharma, which is simply a word from India that means the truth of things, is my term for, or my nod in the direction of this other way of knowing ourselves from the inside out, subjectively, experientially, psychologically. And where these two ways of knowing ourselves come together is, like I said, that word neurodharma. I think that this material is extremely useful in everyday life. I'm a practicing psychologist. I think of myself as a methods guy, someone who's very interested in practice and how we can help ourselves on the long and twisty road of life. And absolutely, for sure, along the way, we're going to want to do what we can in the world around us in ways large and small, from trying to figure out how to stop a faucet from leaking in the middle of the night that keeps us awake, to doing what we can politically at the very highest levels. So we do what we can out there in the world. We do what we can physically in terms of our own body, protecting ourselves, let's say, from the coronavirus, eating reasonably well, trying to get some exercise, which I keep reminding myself to do. And in addition to that, there's a third domain of action inside our own minds. And this, for me, is a very useful place to take action, to practice inside our own thoughts, inside our own feelings, inside the inner temple of our own being. In part because often our capacity to influence the wider world or to influence our own bodies physically is very limited. But always, always inside the sanctuary of our innermost being, we have, as Viktor Frankl put it, a Holocaust survivor who founded logotherapy, puts it, that we have that most fundamental freedom, which is to choose how we will relate to and respond to the conditions around us and the experiences we are having. And in that innermost temple, it's phenomenal to know that we cannot be defeated there. No one can stop us from practicing in this moment with whatever we're experiencing. Sometimes our practice is simply to bear it, to be with it, to feel the feelings, hopefully with some qualities of mindful spaciousness, hopefully with some compassion for our own suffering, right? We can do that in how we relate to our experiences. And some of the time, we can also work with the mind. We can release what is problematic and painful, unwise, unskillful, harmful, a lesser happiness, if you will. And we can also cultivate. We can grow flowers in the garden of the mind, rooted in the brain, so that we can develop qualities such as grit, gratitude, confidence, compassion, and skills for working with others and even working for ourselves. These are our opportunities. No one can stop us from doing that, but no one can do it for us. And so the efforts we make inside our own minds, which include simply feeling our feelings sometimes, if that's all we can do or all we choose to do, no one can do that for us, which means that we will earn the fruits of our own practice. The last thing I'd like to say before opening it up for anything that Jamie might have to say, and then moving into questions, comments, which you're welcome to send in through the chat box and so on. Jamie will field those and kind of moderate all that. Is that this book is about certainly the foundations of practice that are available and accessible to people just starting out. And they're very useful for everyday healing, as I said, being able to rest in a sense of resilient well-being, which is a way of talking about resting in fullness, or to be able to really receive the nowness of the present and abide in the present and not be so caught up in ruminating about the past or worrying about the future. That's really useful these days. It's also true that, in its way, this book is a straight shot for the pinnacle of human possibility. It's a path I'm still on myself. I started walking it in a lot of ways when I was actually quite young. I was a teenager when I started at UCLA in the 1969, the end of the 60s and the early 70s. And I began meditating in 1974. And I've been engaged with human potential, clinical psychology, and contemplative practice for quite a while, and I still see people who are farther along than I am and who I try to learn from and I try to feel encouraged by along the way. So the book, in a real way, really goes after, for real, how do we actually cultivate that quality, those qualities that we see in others, where they're in the present, mindful, courageous heart, contented, feeling kind of one with everything on the edge of mystery, right? Let's go for it. And it's easy, I think, to sort of dismiss the upper reaches of human potential as some sort of luxury item, la-di-da, not really, useful in the trenches. That's absolutely not true. The people we can really learn from, we can see examples of them around the world and at home, are people who are really mature in their practice, who are very engaged with life and undefeated by it. And while their heart is wide open for the sorrows of the world, in the core of their being, there's a kind of unshakable inner peace, a fundamental contentment, and an unconditional love. And that enables them, as we know from many examples, to function really well in the slums of Mumbai, in the prisons, through service, in the middle of horrible political conditions around the world, speaking truth to power. These qualities that I explore in this book and how to actually hardwire them into our own bodies, into our own nervous systems, are enormously important in everyday life. Before I hand this off to Jamie, I'd like to just mention a couple of things that I find enormously useful these days that are drawn from the book and the latest neuroscience on the brain. And they're simple, direct practices anyone can do. So I want to mention them right now. The first is to get a sense of your body as a whole. Normally, you'll notice that attention kind of skitters around one sensation after another, or it fixates on one particular sensation, perhaps as you meditate on the feeling of the breath at the upper lip. Okay, that's fine. And also, what's interesting is to kind of expand the spotlight of attention, to widen it out, to be aware of sensations, let's say around your heart as a whole, and then expanding to your chest as a whole, and then gradually, at your own pace, expanding to include, all of your upper body and all of your lower body all together as a single whole experience with many sensations in it. Much as we look around, we see the visual field as a whole with many parts in it. It's experienced as a whole. In much the same way we can experience the body as a whole. And just try it in the inner laboratory of your own mind, your own experience. And you'll probably notice that very quickly there's a calming and a centering and a present moment awareness that results with probably a softening of whatever's been activated in terms of taking life personally, getting possessive or feeling beleaguered, my precious, me, myself, and I. And the reason that happens is because neurologically, when we go into the sense of things as a whole, we tend to activate neural networks on the sides of the brain, particularly the right hemisphere, the right side for right-handed people, just switched for most left-handed people. And as we engage that right hemisphere activation to the sense of things as a whole, we engage holistic processing, and that quiets neural activity in the midline. It also quiets verbal chatter, and immediately through this sensory awareness of the body as a whole, disengages activity in the default mode network, which is where we go when we're wandering and also ruminating about this or that. Just that, the sense of the body as a whole can be really a powerful thing and a useful thing to do quite privately when, you're stuck in some stressful situation, or just kind of hanging out on, wherever you are, to just tune into the body as a whole. The other thing I'll just point out, also from the book, that practice is from the chapter on being wholeness, with references for it. Also, from the chapter on opening into allness, actually exploring a softening of the self-world boundary and getting more and more of a sense of everything. If you move your gaze out and away from your body, you'll notice that naturally, usually, there's a growing sense that's, we could say, impersonal, less sense of, me, myself, and I, and more of a sense of things as they are, the totality of it all, in a way that is calming and brings us into the present. That's because as the gaze moves out, it naturally engages perceptual networks inside the brain that are called allocentric. They're actually more ancient than the more recent egocentric. They're called neural processing perceptual systems, or frames of reference, really, which get really active when we bring the gaze closer, because that's where friends and foes live back in the Stone Age and in Jurassic Park, etc. So here too, when we're troubled by something or really caught up, it's so helpful to move the gaze out, a few meters away, and then out to the horizon, and then maybe beyond, and notice immediately the kind of effect of that. And this illustrates the broader point, as I finish here, that by drawing on what we increasingly understand about how the body is making the mind, we can engage mental activities that enlist underlying neural activities, leaving lasting traces behind, so that gradually, through our practice, we hardwire these beneficial ways of being into our own nervous system. They become traits that are increasingly established. They're with us then, wherever we go. So I'll finish there, and see what Jamie might have to say, or bring in other people in this discussion, and let's see what's going on here. Yeah, I see a lot of good stuff in the chats. Wow, this is great.
That was fantastic, Rick. I mean, thank you for sharing. It just makes me want to do a meditation right after this. It's in the world today, people are so caught up in going from moment to moment and running from things. There's just something to be said about sitting with your feelings and letting your heart be full. And I just really appreciate that. And we do have quite a few questions for you.
Great. If I could just say something very quick, I'm a fan of deep practice. It's great. I'm also a fan of the one breath at a time meditation, honestly, and to realize that within a few breaths, within a minute or two, we really can shift our states. And with practice, those can become internalized. So very rapidly, we can just drop in. So people should understand that you don't have to go on a meditation retreat. You don't have to do 30 minutes a day. Little practices accumulating over time can really make a big difference. There's a saying in Tibet, apparently, if you take care of the minutes, the years will take care of themselves. And that's what's within range for us to handle, the minutes of the years of our lives.
That's a wonderful starting point. I'm going to start moderating the questions, and I'm going to turn off my video just so people can focus, on all your glory.
No self, no problem.
Okay, so let's start with a question from Bella Michelle. She wants to know if you can speak more about the edge of mystery and how we can safely get to the edge and look over.
Wow. Okay, great. So some of my teachers and people I respect a lot stay entirely within the secular frame. And in terms of timelessness, that is a way of talking about what could be unconditioned. And I use the really penetrating analysis of the mind from the Buddha 2,500 years ago as a kind of roadmap for a particular route up the mountain of awakening, and also as a way of understanding these 7 qualities that are like 7 steps that we find taken again and again on any route, a secular route, a Sufi route, First People, Indigenous people route up the mountain, Christian, Jewish, what have you, up the root of the mountain. We find these same 7 qualities developed in all of them. And so in that context then, I want to acknowledge that we can relate to what the Buddha called as unconditioned, as the ultimate refuge, because all conditioned phenomena are subject to arising and passing away. And therefore, they're not an ultimately reliable basis for the highest happiness of all. So he spoke of an encounter through nirvana with ultimate unconditioned. And people have been trying to figure out for the last 2,500 years what in the world he was talking about. For me, there are 3 ways to understand unconditioned. First is in terms of disengaging from our conditioned neurotic habits. Yeah, I still have some, and opening increasingly into a sense of unconditioned awareness. It's effectively unconditioned. It's conditioned by our own biology, but within that frame, awareness is a field of infinite possibility because our awareness can represent anything, right? And with a sense of spaciousness and stillness. A second way to understand unconditioned is through intensive meditative training, usually, that culminates in an extraordinary cessation of all conditioned experiences within ordinary reality. So far, so secular. The third way to understand unconditioned, which is real for me, and I'm responding here to the question, is in terms of transcendental unconditionality, a mysterious, unconditioned field, the ground, the absolute, which may well have qualities that many people throughout history and around the world have had a sense of and or a faith in, qualities of consciousness and love. In the book itself, I stay pretty close to the Buddha's fairly bare description through negation of the transcendental, I think, as deathless, not subject to birth, not subject to passing away, unconditioned. And then the question becomes, how can we become more accessible to that if that's of interest? And I don't preach at people in the book. I just name this third way of understanding unconditioned to be inclusive and also to respect what I consider was the Buddhas and also the greatest teachers of all, their aim for the ultimate, some kind of accessibility and permeability to that which is transcendental. And one of the opportunities, I think, for all of us, I'll finish on this, is to practice inside the natural, inside the ordinary, still remarkable, but ordinary Big Bang universe, to practice with our bodies and our minds and our actions in such a way that, in effect, clears away the mud and crud on the stained glass windows of our own being, our own minds, so that the light that was always already there can shine through. And I will just leave you with a very kind of, for me, real practice I routinely do, which is to get a sense of what's always just before now, continuously. And it's a kind of koan. It sort of stops us, and yet you can start to have an intuition, I think, of unconditioned possibility, always, timelessly, just before conditioned actuality. So you can have a sense of time flowing through timelessness. And that's a really neat practice to develop. Okay. How about another question or comment from people?
Oh, we've got plenty.
Maybe something really practical, like what to do with the people you live with during the time of Corona.
Well, I'm sure that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
Eric Hanneman is wondering about wholeness, and it's the topic for him that shows the most resistance. And he's wondering how you briefly describe someone who has achieved wholeness.
Yeah. Well, let's go through that. That's really great. So there are aspects of it. One aspect is to accept oneself fully. And as a longtime therapist, that's no small accomplishment, certainly for me and for many people. In other words, to actually open up all the doors of all the rooms in the mind, including in the basement where maybe some really difficult challenges lie. And it's important to resource ourselves through developing things like steadiness of mind or warmth of heart, which includes self-compassion, and to resource ourselves through developing emotional balance, equanimity, through the practice of resting in fullness. So we resource ourselves so that when we do open some of those doors, we're not overwhelmed, and it's not like opening a trapdoor to hell. Very important. That said, wholeness for me includes self-acceptance, and I have practices in the book that really get into that. It also includes a sense of disengaging from the ruminator, the default mode network in the back, and these midline activities, and resting more in a sense of being, which is characterized by a lot of lateral right-sided network activation, in which doing is occurring, but it's in a field of being. We have more and more of a sense of being as a process in which doing is occurring. So we can cultivate that, particularly through mindful awareness, and I have some practices of expanding into your body as a whole. And then we can also experience our consciousness as a whole. And I mean this in a very natural, down-to-earth way. In any moment, there is this moment of experience. Much as the visual imagery of the room is experienced as a whole with many parts in it, we have the opportunity to experience this moment of mind. By mind, I mean the totality of our consciousness, not just that small part of which is intellect. So we can experience this moment of mind, this moment of consciousness, as a single unified gestalt in the present continuously. And as we do that, as you kind of soften and widen and open out into the sense of your being as a whole, being as process, your mind, your consciousness as a whole, you'll notice that suffering diminishes, because the structure of all suffering involves, in effect, inner conflict, parts, tussling with other parts. See the cookie, that's a part. Want the cookie, that's part two. Inner critic says, no, you don't get a cookie. Bad, no cookie for you. Then a fourth part comes in. Oh, it's been a tough day. It's okay. Cookie's okay. And then a fifth part comes in. What? Am I mad? Who are all these parts, right? Now we're suffering. On the other hand, when we go out into mind as a whole, the parts, kind of soften. They're just part of the whole. And when that happens, whooshkaba, suffering really, really, really declines. So those would be aspects of being wholeness that I explore in the book, which illustrates the broader point. I'm trying to take aspects and ways of being that are fundamental to healing from our stuff, as well as ordinary, psychological well-being and self-actualization and human potential, as well as really going for it. Which I think is the spirit of all the great teachers. They encourage us onward to go for it, to really rest in that very powerful felt sense of simply being as a whole in the present while dealing with the challenges of life. Okay. Next one.
Yes, so kind of a flip side, but along the same lines, Stephen Grizzle's wondering, which of the 7 practices help lessen the sense of the self?
Oh, very good. So that's great, astute question. I locate, so as we do all of them, there can be less problematic preoccupation with ourselves and less of a contracted sense that there's some sort of brick-like, thing-like entity inside that needs to be glamorized or protected and identified with. So, selfing increases when we're stressed or attacked and beleaguered, understandably. So cultivating an internal sense of contentment and resilient well-being is really useful, sort of as a foundational. Then additionally, in terms of the material on opening into allness, that's where I really explore what neuroscience can tell us about the conventional notion that there's some kind of unified, enduring, independent entity inside who, we are. When in fact, psychologically, just observing our own experience, we can recognize that, that sense of I is actually compounded. It's made of many parts. It's not unified, nor is it enduring, because the sense of self is ebbing and flowing continuously based on various stimuli and causes and conditions. So it's impermanent in a sense. It's dynamic. It's changing. It's not enduring. And third, it's not independent, because the sense of self arises dependently upon various stimuli and conditions in us and around us. All right, that's our psychology. What the Allness chapter also gets at is amazingly useful and kind of jaw-dropping in its implications, neuroscience, that shows that the activations neural activations that underlie the psychological or mental experience of the apparent self, those neurological activations are not unified, enduring, or independent either. They're compounded, they're widely distributed around the brain. They're very dynamic. They kind of light up and then go back quiet again, like the flashing lights of a Christmas tree all over the place. And all that flashing is not independent, but in fact occurs dependently on various activities and stimuli. So it's really interesting that the presumed defining attributes of the conventionally presumed psychological self, I don't mean this in an ultimate cosmic soul sense. I mean it in a very down-to-earth psychological sense and so forth, that the so-called constituting or defining attributes of the so-called presumed self cannot be found in the brain, much as they cannot be found in the mind. And that has lots of implications. And we're still persons. It's very important. And I think there's a nice way of putting this that you could see in writing. It's easier to see it in writing. It's a saying from a teacher: love yourself. Just don't love yourself, right? So it's important to respect persons. They have rights and responsibilities. They deserve our care, including the person who has our name tag. The mind-body process that is personing, in effect, through time as a kind of eddy in the stream of allness, using a metaphor I draw on a lot in the book. So we are persons. Persons exist, right? In my view, the purported self is like a unicorn. We have notions of it, but it's not a real thing. We can have notions of a horse, and they are notions of a real something or other. Unicorns, are not, real. And in much the same way, I don't think the purported, psychological self is real. But persons, without a doubt, are. And actually, interestingly, as we care for persons, as we care for this person, oneself in the sense of being a person, as we care for that person, conceit, arrogance, egoity tends to reduce. And it's actually a really powerful practice, and one I've done a lot myself, to internalize healthy social supplies, what could be called narcissistic supplies, of feeling seen, included, prized, cherished, liked and loved, befriended, respected by other people. It's interesting that as we actually internalize those, we take in that good again and again, and we fill the hungry heart, and we really receive it into ourselves and help it land, this selfing diminishes as we fill ourselves up with the sense of worthiness as a person. And that's a beautiful practice. Okay, another one?
You ready for a tricky one?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
Tips for helping a 13-year-old manage their frustrations and moodiness during the COVID experience.
Right. Well, I can't quite tell whether I'm speaking to the 13-year-old or the interested party parent. I remember my childhood, including my teens, really well. I've worked a lot with kids. My dissertation was on 15-month-olds. So I think there are a lot of levels to it. One is to take into account temperament and to honor the temperament. People really vary. And some people, including 13-year-olds, need more stimulation than others, and are just going to have more of an emotional roller coaster than others, and that's just their nature, right? And the band, the tribe in a sense, needs all temperaments. There's no pathology in terms of a person's temperament. Second, I think it's really good to just sort of take care of the body, food, protein at every meal, one kind or another, sort of regulating blood sugar, sleep, things like that. It can actually, in small ways, add up to something moderate, if not big, that helps to regulate the psychology of the person. Another, I think there's a place for legitimate parental authority. My theory of parenting is big pastures, real fences. And I think, it's okay to say essentially to a person, wow, we really need to talk. You're landing really hard on all of us right now. What can we do? What can we do together to make a shift here and to claim appropriate parental authority? Having said that, I also think it's really important to not overregulate kids, big pastures, and to take into account the ways in which things are tough for them too, and to be careful about our own anger. I would say probably all of the mistakes I've ever made as a parent, or most of them certainly, began with my anger. It's natural for parents to have anger. We need to be with it. That's the primary practice, to actually feel it, to own it, to let it be. But that's very different from speaking or acting from it. And, I remember basically every single time my parents lashed out at me, not physically, but verbally in anger. And, we land on our kids in that way. So I think it's really important to just be particularly careful about that. The last thing I would say, many teenagers, many kids are interested in learning about their own minds, including through the window of the brain. They pay attention then, and because it's physical, right? It's not airy-fairy, woo-woo, touchy-feely stuff. It's the brain. And they like learning how to release tension and upset with a breath. Telling them to do that when they're mad, it's trying to put out a bonfire with a squirt gun, doesn't really work. But offline, beforehand, talking about things they can do to exhale and calm themselves down, really good. It's really important, I think, to help kids understand how they can guide their own brain change process from the inside out through taking in the good, through actually helping beneficial experiences last for a breath or longer while being felt in the body and enjoyed. Those are three separate ways to increase the conversion of the experiences we're having to lasting neuroplastic change inside ourselves. And I'll just finish, I guess, on, for me, one of the most powerful things that ever happened to me as a teenager, and it was so rare that it really was memorable, was an adult looked at me and spoke to me with respect. Not patronizing, not condescending, not pseudo-respect, actually genuine respect, with a sense of there was actually a being over here that had views and autonomy in many ways, oneself. And I think that's one of the most powerful gifts we can give young people of all ages, to really come out of the vertical structure, which occasionally we have to claim to exercise authority, but otherwise, boom, drop into a horizontal level of two beings. We're all in this together. Yeah, I'm older than you are. Yeah, I don't know. I've got credit cards, you don't, or whatever. But, here we are. What's it like to be you? How's it going to be you? How am I landing on you in ways that are a problem for you? What can I do? What do you want? What would make it better for you? Just some kind of presence with them simply can have an enormous impact. And the times that grown-ups did that with me, I would say were enormously beneficial for me. And that's one thing we can offer kids of all ages, including 13-year-olds, including maybe when we're feeling pretty aggravated. Okay.
All
Other
right.
people?
This one is just a comment.
Please.
From someone who purchased your audiobook, and she says it's a huge plus to have Rick read the book himself and also have the included meditation practice in the same audio. She went walking today and listened to it at the same time and never imagined how powerful this would be for her. So she thanks you for sharing your knowledge with her.
Oh, thank you very much. And I would say if you like the audiobook is good. Also, I was talking with Jamie beforehand. I taught this material in the frame of a 10-day meditation retreat. I've done that twice already. I'll keep doing that when we can start gathering again together physically. And we turned it into a really well-organized, high-quality online program. I think somehow we'll share the links for that with you, and you could check it out yourself. And it's a really nice way to do the Neurodharma online program, which has talks in it, guided meditations, a lot of additional commentary from me, and questions and answers. And it's an extremely good complement to the book, the online program. Okay, good.
Great. I just shared the link for all of those interested. Another question we have is if you can explain more about what you mean by reverse engineering enlightenment.
Okay, that's great. Well, enlightenment itself is a tricky word, and I try to be respectful of it. And you can see in the book, I've really tried to, nuance how I talk about it. To the extent that enlightenment or similar words, awakening, or I'm going to use a very kind of powerful term, God realization, let's say, the ultimate. To the extent that that involves things possibly that are meaningfully distinct from the natural frame, it's called in science, of the Big Bang universe, that's beyond logic and language of ordinary discourse. Okay. On the other hand, the process of transformation on the way is occurring within a living body. And at the level of synapses, tiny junctions between neurons, at the level of other systems in the body, not just in the nervous system, hormonal, cardiovascular, gastrointestinal. The body continuously is making the mind. So those changes, those transformations that are occurring in people who've been practicing for many, many years, or within people who've had a transformational awakening that has radically and irrevocably altered their way of being, there must be some shifts in the brain. And also in their new way of being with unconditional love, strong present moment awareness, fearless courage in the face of injustice, those qualities in them must be based in underlying factors and processes and structures in their own body. Otherwise, we're left with magic, or we're left with other things outside the natural frame. So that's what I mean by reverse engineering. With respect and appreciating how much we don't yet know. Neuroscience is a baby science, but we know more than nothing. And if we have to know everything about a topic before we say anything about it, we'll never say anything at all. So we are beginning to understand some of what could be going on in the brains of people who are very, very far along in practice, who've really stabilized and established a sense, minimally, of allness, nowness, wholeness, fullness, lovingness, and steadiness. And perhaps also have become increasingly accessible to and permeable to the mysterious infinite. So we can study that. And then for me, as a practical guy, deeply interested in practice and the process of healing and transformation and even awakening, we can start to mobilize those underlying physical factors inside ourselves skillfully through our mental practices, not through taking another pill, not through some kind of electroshock or something or other with our brain. Actually, by just simply, as I said, being aware of the body as a whole, or shifting the gaze out to everything, or having insight into the moment-to-moment construction of the apparent sense of self, right? We can do that And as we do that, we transform ourselves. And as the mind changes, as our state of being, as our consciousness changes, that's evidence that the underlying neurobiology of us must be changing as well. That's what I mean by that reverse engineering, which I find audacious. There's a kind of like, yeah, let's go for it. I've been thinking lately about Neil Young's song, Rockin' in the Free World. I mean, there's a certain moxie that's involved in saying, hey, I'm interested at least in taking the next step in my own awakening for the sake of others, as well as for myself. I want to take that next step. I don't need to know the whole path, but I just need to have a sense of what that next step is. And it helps to have some confidence that step by step by step by step, it will lead onward to a really good place.
Great, thank you. Someone is wondering if you can talk about healing from trauma.
Oh, yeah. That's a huge topic, of course, deep, deep, deep topic. I want to enter that, and I know we're going to be finishing up in a few minutes, with a quotation, as best we know, from Milarepa, who's a great Tibetan adept 1,000 or so years ago. And he was describing his own life of practice. And he did so in a way that I find really profound about our lives altogether, as well as profound with regard to any particular thing, such as healing from trauma that we're engaged with. He said, in the beginning, nothing came. In the middle, nothing stayed. And in the end, nothing left. Really powerful way to understand the path. In the beginning, we try to have experiences. So in the beginning, let's say we try to have a freedom from intrusive traumatic material, but we don't experience it. We try to experience self-compassion, kindness, sweetness for ourselves. Can't do it. Doesn't come, right? In the middle, with some practice, we do start to experience those things when we're deliberately engaged with them. When we're deliberately focused, we can have compassion for ourselves. When we're deliberately focused, we can disidentify from, we can step back from the trauma material. We can recognize when we're deliberately making the effort to do that it wasn't our fault what happened to us back then, right? But it doesn't become a trait. It's not yet a trait. It's not yet established in us. And then with practice, again and again and again, taking care of the minutes, so gradually the years do take care of themselves, it becomes increasingly stabilized in us that, we had those traumatic experiences. We are not those traumatic experiences, right? It becomes increasingly stabilized just in the background of awareness and accessible to move forward at will or simply automatically. We have a supportiveness for ourselves. We're on our own side. We're a friend to ourselves. We're for ourselves with both a muscular quality of encouragement and guidance and a tender, sweet aspect of compassion and kindness for our own suffering. Those become more natural to us. So for me, that's a way of talking about the process. And to really, really, really summarize an awful lot of material, I think it's, of course, very helpful to do structured approaches for working with trauma and getting down to the deepest roots, which are typically somatic. They're embodied. They can be quite intense, and working in typically some kind of therapeutic frame, ideally with people who have a license and are skilled and experienced there, so we don't get re-traumatized. That's certainly really important. But at the end of it all, the one thing I would just kind of offer from my own background, I'm not so sure I've been traumatized, but I certainly have felt miserable for long, long periods of time, and I've definitely been mistreated in various ways. And there are things in my life these days even that are like kind of stunning how some people can be. So in that context, I find that it's really helpful to not get obsessed with pulling all the weeds in the garden of the mind, because that's an infinite process. Pulling all the weeds in the garden of the mind is like trying to polish butter. It's intractable. Meanwhile, as the Jewish proverb, I believe, has it, it's better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness. In other words, we every day, no matter how much we're kind of afflicted with that old material, we can grow beneficial qualities of mind and heart alongside it. We can grow gratitude alongside the sense of loss. We can grow a feeling of our own worth and value, including in a fundamental transpersonal sense, if that's accessible to someone. We can grow the sense of that, and we can take refuge increasingly in that alongside old, even intractable feelings of shame and inadequacy and being somehow damaged or flawed or broken. That can be over there, you know. If we keep struggling with it, it almost reinforces it. We can bow to it. I got it. I understand how that happened. In our common humanity, that's a natural consequence of trauma. The brain is designed to be shaped and to learn from trauma for survival purposes. So that's over there. And yeah, we could try to clear it. I'm all for that. And meanwhile, though, where we typically have a lot of influence is on what we're growing inside us every day. And knowing that we have this ineradicable, cannot be taken from us, right? Remarkable capacity every day based on how we relate to our experiences, the experiences we encourage, and then how we internalize beneficial experiences so they gradually become reinforced inside us and become the new habits of our heart. You know, those opportunities to grow flowers, broadly stated, in the garden of the mind are available to us. And just knowing that is a wonderful antidote to the sense of helplessness, entrapment, and painful defeat that is so central and characteristic of, central to and characteristic of trauma. And then along the way, you know, you develop good things inside. And it's not about ignoring the pain. It's not about trying to cover over those places inside your own mind. It's rocking in the free world meanwhile as best we can every day. And knowing that as we do cultivate these qualities inside us and put more minutes and days between us and what happened then, as we do that, it's good for other people too. We practice for their sake as well as for our own.
That was a beautiful answer. Thank you. So maybe we can wrap up with one question that's kind of for you.
All right.
Misty is wondering, were there any surprise revelations or aha moments about yourself when writing this book?
Ooh, good for you. That's a courageous question, you know, and I think these days more than ever, it's so valuable to honor courage, right? And I like the fact that as a writer, that the root of the word for courage, you may well know, is heart, right? Heart. About myself, I kind of, well, quite frankly, one thing that came up for me was I could see in ways I hadn't really recognized my own heartfelt love of practice. At any point on the path, you know, I think of the path, right? We see the mountain here. That's cool. But what about the dusty plains and even the jungle swamps here, right? And I have a lot of passion for practice at any stage along the way. I'm interested in it. And I guess I was really struck by that, as well as my longing for the heights. I'm not yet living there on the top of the mountain. You know, I'm on the path myself in my own way, but it kind of stood out for me how much I care about that ultimately, and just have a love for practice. I get so delighted, honestly. So I would say that. I think I think that's really it. Yeah, I'll just maybe pause there. I could blather on all night long. I want to let you all go and not keep you too long here.
Well, thank you
Well,
so
actually,
much.
oh, okay. Here you go. Here you go. Here you go. One thing that I would say one thing that kind of surprised me in a way was this key word that comes from a translation of apparently the Buddha's last words on his deathbed. And they are translated in various ways. I really like the translation from Stephen Batchelor, a great teacher, practitioner, and scholar of Buddhism, including inside of a secular frame. He translates the last words of the Buddha as, "Things fall apart, tread the path with care." And that seems so relevant. Both the recognition with insight and wisdom of impermanence and the emptiness of everything. It's existent, but it's empty. Things do fall apart. Tread the path with care. And by care, we have both the aspect of conscientiousness and diligence, and we have the aspect of love and kindness and caring. And that word care, we say casually, take care means different things, but that word care, one syllable, it's really a good word. It's really sweet. And I'm reminded of the T.S. Eliot line in his poem, I think Little Gidding, says, teach us to care and not to care. Teach us to sit still. And there I think we have as well as an opportunity in terms of how to practice with this time, both to care in the sense of real compassion. Teach us to care, sense of real compassion, not leaving people out, and helping ourselves have a heart that's open enough and wide enough and broken, open enough to really be present with all the sorrows of the world, while at the same time resting in an underlying, authentic ground of serenity and equanimity that, in a key way of understanding this phrase, doesn't care, just rested in a fundamental peacefulness. And to be in touch with both of those, to be in touch with this fundamental peacefulness while also caring deeply, is for me, it's an ongoing practice for myself. It's an ongoing cultivation. And still, it seems like such a useful place to stand as we face this current plague and more generally, face the challenges of this world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hanson. That was such a great way to kick off our online event program. I want to thank everyone for attending, and we did share all of the links for purchasing the book as well as his online meditation program, and we will do a follow-up email probably tomorrow. Sorry, I'm turning on my video again and I had to move. But we will do a follow-up email tomorrow that includes the links, kind of a recap. We will also edit this, so we'll include a link for you to share it with any of your friends or other people that, might find use out of it. We're getting lots of comments from everyone thanking you so much.
Oh, thank you all, and thank you, Copperfields. Thank you, bookstores, and thank you, anyone. Thank you, the people who invented writing and reading, 5,000 or so years ago. Anyway, thank you very much. I really appreciate being here.
Great. Yeah. All right, and with that, I'm going to end the meeting, and we'll catch you all next time. Our next event is Friday, and have a great evening.